It is vlog 278. The last time you were with us, we were in the midst of a winning streak. There have been new developments on that front. Let's tell you about them and get this vlog started right now. So the first two hands on this vlog happened several days before the session you're going to see, but they'd come against, at least one of them, a familiar foe. The first one would come when I'd open 6-7 of diamonds, middle position 2, and would get called by Mr. W, the legend, on the button. Big blind also would come in here, and with 100 in, the board would come out Jack 6-7, 1 diamond, giving me bottom 2 pair. Check to me, and I bet half the pot here. Mr. W doesn't waste too much time calling on the button, with the big blind going out. So with 200 in, the turn is the ace of diamonds, giving me a flush draw to go along with 2 pair. I'm going to keep betting here, certainly. I make it 150. He thinks about it for a second, and then finally makes the call. So with 500 in, I'm feeling pretty good about this hand going to the river, which comes an offsuit 8. Now I'm still going to be betting for value here, though I'm not the world's biggest fan of the runout. I make it 200. And this was a spot where I needed to fade the snap call, because if I did that, given the range she'll be happy to pay me off with, I'm always winning. But I don't fade the snap call. He instantly puts in the money, creating a $900 pot. And after I show my cards, he tables ace 7 for a turn suck out. And all I could think about was, wow, that could have been so much worse against this particular opponent. Because had he jammed his final 600 on the turn there, I am never folding against him. So that's value that he definitely missed out on. I guess we could have run it twice and I could have hit a diamond, but either way, he might have doubled up. Instead, he has to settle for just winning that pot. And a half an hour later, I pick up another suited connector and would decide to play that as well. This time raising 7-8 of spades over a limp from the cutoff. The big blind is a gentleman around the age of 80 who, I don't know, but after I made this raise, he would fold his arms in visible contemplation before finally, 10 seconds later, making the call. I wasn't sure if he was sandbagging a big hand or talking himself into playing one that isn't so great. Spoiler alert, it was one of those two things. Limper calls under the gun 1. And with 105 in, the flop would come out king 7-8 2 clubs, giving me bottom 2 pair again. Check to me, and this time I bet more than half the pot, making it 75. The guy in the big blind check raises to 225. Other player folds, and it's back on me. So what do I do here? I have about 600 behind. He has about the same. I'm certainly not ready to fold this hand yet. It seems a bit ridiculous. And my thought was, I don't know how this guy plays. But obviously, older gentlemen, you can make your own conclusions. I figured if I were to call this and get a blank on the turn, it would make my decision a lot easier. So that's ultimately what I would decide to do. Putting in those chips, and with 555 in, the turn would come a blank. The 3 of diamonds. So I certainly have done that part of it. And then the big blind jams all in for his last 470. Now, pocket 7s and pocket 8s are going to be very tough to have here, obviously. I know some old guys will never raise pre-flop, even with kings, but that felt unlikely to me in this spot. So it came down to, would a guy who I have never seen play a hand before show up with king 7 or king 8 in this spot? And I just didn't think so. So despite the fact I didn't know what hand I was expecting to see here, part of me thought, given that pre-flop contemplation, that he might have pocket aces and wanting to set this trap for me and now is jamming. But that could have been just me being optimistic. Either way, I make the call, and we have a $1,495 pot And he shows King 7 of Hearts for the 2 pair, explaining the pre-flop contemplation as, should I play this hand out of position? And ultimately deciding to do it. I would not hit my 2 outs on the river, and that pot would get shipped over to him. So that is how my 12-session winning streak would come to an end, losing about 900 on that day. Perhaps the moral of this story is, suited connectors were created to make straights and flushes. 2 pair, not so much. By the way, I meant to tell you guys, I'm gambling, by the way. I have lit $300 on fire. If you're like me and you're a cash game grinder, you don't consider that gambling, and you make a point not to gamble anywhere else in the casino. But I'm gambling out of the casino because I had been wanting to get into my guy Brett's.
You're Brett, right?
Fantasy football league for quite some time, the former dealer at the Peppermill, who says he might come back, by the way, I'm not sure. But he has a dynasty league, and there's 12 teams in it. I had to wait for someone to quit the league, and finally that happened. Problem was, I didn't get to inherit the guy who quit's team. Another guy would leave his team, jump over to that team, and I got to inherit the shittiest team in the Nuts Fantasy Football League. So I am drawing near dead to make a run in this league this year, but I wanted to get in on the Dynasty Fantasy Football League, and I'm in there. Just thought I'd let you guys know. Anyway, on this day, I would show up to Peppermill at noon to find the sports book with the newly unveiled bar area. Though I didn't like the fact that one of the first things I would ever see in that new area was a replay of the most painful day of my sporting life. The casino, by the way, as it always is after Burning Man, was loaded with burners in the parking lot, cars covered in that familiar playa dust. But, as usual, the cast of characters in the 0510 No Limit Hold'em game in the poker room wasn't all that much different. Mr. W, Bomb Pop Blue, John the Concert Merch King, and a man who is a slightly better soccer player than me. I'd raised to 30 playing 5-handed with pocket kings under the gun. The first hand I've played in an hour, and all but one player would call me. I generally get more action than I deserve, and it's yet another example. Anyway, with 120 in, the flop would come out 8-6-9, 2 hearts. I bet 80 here, and it folds to the Merch King in the big blind, who calls me. So with 280 in, the turn is another 8. Pretty good card for me. I bet out 150 in this spot with kings, and he does give it some thought before finally deciding to make the call, leaving himself 400 behind. And with 580 in, the river is another 9. Pretty much a nightmare. He checks for a third time, and it seems to me that he either has missed a draw and can't call anything, or he has improved to the best hand and is trying to check raise. So I just check back kings here, and he tables 9-10 offsuit for the rivered boat, and I get kings cracked right out of the gate. Mr. W and Brian would get into an all-in, and while one of those two is adamant that I don't show him in the vlog, the audio was funny.
I know, we could have run twice. I would have been happy to run it.
Jack of Hearts. Oh, I got there.
Hot wagon!
Yes.
Unfucking believable.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
If you want to know how to play a hand bad, I've showed you last week, and I'm showing you again, apparently. It would come when I'd opened $35 under the gun +1 with Queen Jack of Hearts. Mr. W calls in the cutoff, and the button would 3-bet me to 110. Probably could be a fold here, but he gives me a lot of action, and I figure I'm going to reciprocate, primarily due to the fact that I'm assuming that Mr. W is also going to be coming in there, and playing a 3-way pot here could have some possibilities. Unfortunately, after I'd make the call, Mr. W wouldn't, so he'd leave me heads up, and with 260 in, the flop would come out Jack 10-5 with 2 clubs, and I check. I'm actually considering just check folding this flop, but to my surprise, he doesn't bet, and the turn is the 6 of hearts. Given the fact he checked back the flop, I figure I'm going to be ahead a lot here, so I wager $85. He does think about it for a second, and decides to call. So with 430 in, the river is another jack. So front door clubs brick out, and I make trips. I bet 160 with $500 behind. And he proceeds to slide in all of his chips here. So I have a $500 decision now. He's capable of bluffing, certainly, but I would think that he would think that I either have trips or nothing in this spot. Because really, what else could I possibly have here? Either I missed a draw, or I have 3 jacks. It just seemed like a horrible card for him, having not bet the flop and 3-bet pre, to try to bluff me out here if he had a hand like ace-king. And it seems like if he was going to try and do that, he would have fired the flop, not go for the river check raise, when it really feels like I'm going to be calling. And I certainly haven't played a million hands against this particular opponent, but I know that he's gotten me in a few big ones where he has done things like slow play sets on flops like this, and I certainly thought that was a possibility here. And it's also possible that he just checked back ace-jack on the flop, and now that he hit trips with an ace-kicker, knows it's good and wants to go for full value. So I really had to think about this. I've always prided myself on being a guy that can get away from hands that other players can't. And generally speaking, that's been a very profitable long-term concept for me. I would fold this one. And that was not a profitable move for me, as he would show ace-king for the bluff. So I make a pretty terrible play, and it cost me. But as my buddy Gary often says when I tell him stories about losing pots like this, he always asks the same question. Did you lose it to a nice guy? And in this case, as it usually always is, for all but like 3 guys in my player pool, the answer is yes. All right, so we are loaded in burners here. And I always think of the same thing, Rena. I always think of the same thing. If Kayla Corner were to like make some sort of Burning Man cameo, I think it would break the internet. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. She's got all the clothes for it.
Exactly. The world needs this.
Kayla Unleashed. I'm not certain you guys could handle it.
That might be true too. Good news for me was it was a week where my 49ers would finally get Trent Williams into camp. I would have hated to see that offensive line without him, so I'll take that as a positive. I then opened 35 to the right of the rock with pocket aces. Hijack 3-bets me 210. Folds back around to me, and I'm certainly going to be 4-betting here. I make it 275. He thinks about it for a minute, asks me how much I have behind. The answer was just over 1,000. He thinks about it even more, and finally decides on simply returning his cards to the dealer and moving on. So last week I talked about Wordle and how the cool thing about it is how it displays your stats about your streak and things like that. And I asked on the vlog, as you heard, why the game Connections on the same app doesn't do that. I swear to you this is true. The day after the vlog was published, Connections announced it was indeed doing exactly what I said it should do. And I just thought that was kind of cool. We'd get a hand where Mr. W would get me for another 300 when I flopped top pair, and he missed his flush. But unfortunately for me, river to pair of kings, and I definitely didn't see that one coming. The next 2 hours were absolutely miserable, which I guess wasn't a huge change from the first couple hours. Not 100% sure how much I'd proceed to lose during that time, but I knew I was down about 1,500 on the day at that point. A decent amount of that money came from me getting into good situations in bomb pots and getting drawn out on the river. And speaking of which, this next bomb pot was a memorable one. 8 players in a double board pot. I have ace-jack, and with 200 in, I flop a pair of aces on both boards. I'm first to act, and I bet out for 75. Middle position 2, the low jack, and the cutoff. All call. And I just want to point out that it's very rare in these double board pots to play 4 ways to the turn. That almost never happens. But with 500 in, I get the 2 most brutal turn cards imaginable. The 3 of hearts on one, bringing in a flush and straight draw, and the 6 of clubs on the other, bringing in the other draw. So I'm already just disgusted here, and I'm first to act. But I figure maybe I can check here and still find a way to continue on with aces on each board. First player, who happens to be nicknamed Bomb Pot Blue, jams all in. The second player is Mr. W, and he jams all in 5 times a day before breakfast. And he makes it 6 here, puts all his chips into the middle of the pot. Then, a third guy who drives in from Grass Valley, California to play in this game also jams all in. So I figured I might win both boards when I looked down at those flops, drilling both of them. And somehow, everyone has gone all in on 2 miserable turn cards. And now I'm not going to win either one. Doesn't quite seem fair. But I'd fold, and 2 players with flushes would chop up another one who really got burned in the hand. And speaking of chopping, that's what I would proceed to do a little while later. I'd flop a set of 3s. And John would raise me when he had 2 overcards and a flush draw. Little did he know, his overcards weren't any good, as I would raise him all in for about $600 more. He would call. We would agree to run it twice. I would actually make quads on the top board, but the flush would come in on the second. A pretty good omen that a day that was already miserable wasn't going to get any better. Oddly enough, it wasn't the only omen. When I charge my Tesla at Peppermill, I like to usually move it out of the charging stations when it is fully charged so others can use them. That only takes a couple of minutes, but I have to walk across the property and then drive it over to the other side. During the few minutes it took me to do that, I came back and the game on table 1 had broken. So I'd have to wait about another hour, and I only had about 2.5 more hours available to play, to get in to the second game. And unfortunately for me, I would get into the second game, and the only hand I'd play there, I'd get coolered as well, as you're going to hear about in a second, on a day in which I wouldn't lose all my chips, but I'd lose a hell of a lot of them, booking a substantial loss. All right, cashing out, booking a loss of $1,855. Obviously, we had a great run throughout July and August. Had to believe we'd start running pretty bad at some point, and that time has arrived. In this session, you heard about the fact that the game broke when I went to move my car around the casino. I waited for about 45 minutes to get into the second game. It was not particularly good. I ran queens into a hand that was 100% aces or kings. I went on to fold it on the turn. I should have folded on the flop, but I ended up losing about 450 in that hand to account for the remainder of that loss on a day I'd like to forget about. I mean, you thought the Peppermill had a lot of RVs. Just look at it. Rows and rows and rows of them over at the Grand Sierra Resort following Burning Man. It never ceases to amaze me how many people go to that festival and then come and stay at the Reno hotels afterwards. And I gotta make a confession. You know, living here in Reno all these years, being the closest city to Burning Man, granted, not the kind of thing that I would typically ever do, and I wouldn't get as much attention for doing it as Kayla would, as we talked about. But I've always kind of wanted to go, and I think it would be cool to incorporate it into this vlog. If I found a way to, for 1 year, go to Burning Man. And I asked Anna about it. She's on board. The first reaction she had was, oh, I got to plan out some outfits. So the question is, can I talk someone into giving me a reasonable rate on an RV rental for either next year's Burning Man or the one after that, hoping to have a vlog special that could potentially be shot there. That is my hope. And I'm just telling you guys right now. The other thing that I want to tell you is if you're looking to play poker when you're on the go, the place to go is the High Society group on Poker Bros. I can guarantee you it is the most trustworthy group. I have not had a single complaint with regards to transactions, getting money in, getting money out. Now, these Asian apps can be tricky in other places. Not this one. This is the place you can guarantee you're going to be able to handle all those transactions fairly. So if you want to play, want to get some practice, as I like to say, obviously real money, but when you're in places where you can't actually get to a live game, Sometimes it's fun to get a little practice in there. And we have here talking about practice, man. Then give that group a try and support this vlog while you're doing it. All the information you need, the group code and referral code, is in the description below. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. It's great for this channel. Follow along on Instagram at bendeach, and we're back next time.
I've got an itch I can't scratch, I'm missing a piece that completes a whole part of me, an open wound scar to see. Everybody come here, gather round, welcome to the freak show, the best in town. What the hell's wrong with me? I don't get along with anybody, honestly. I've been living in my own head constantly, thoughts jumbled round, think I need a new lobotomy. Wait, all these thoughts are too negative. I don't wanna get lost in the sedative. Gotta show them what I got, I'm competitive. You know I'm about to go off, I won't let them win.